Would you please take a breath? The night before she hung herself, my 34-year-old mother tucked my two brothers and sister into bed and said goodbye to each of them. I don't remember her saying goodbye to me. Something was altered in my 5-year-old psyche that night. As we drove away from our home, I understood that my mother decided to die, and I quietly decided that must have been because of me. Decades later, the renowned addiction specialist, Dr. Gabor Mate, would brilliantly name that moment for me when he said, "Trauma is not the thing that happens to us. It's what happens inside of us as a result." For years after that, I would tell myself a story about my lack, never hers. In order to stay connected to my mother, I needed to stay disconnected from myself. It was an unconscious, choiceless choice, and it would become a lifelong habit. Eventually, I had 3 little kids of my own whom I love so much it hurt, but I was outnumbered by them, and I couldn't predict or control their behavior. I was starting to become an angry mom. I could not have told you that about myself at the time, but now I can see how I was. And so I put myself into a parenting class that introduced me to a psychological tool called the Enneagram. It helped me to understand the unconscious cognitive, emotional, and behavioral strategies we all use to survive our childhoods. The first thing this profound system taught me is that we all come into the world as divine little sparks, ready to love and be loved. We come essentially good and lovable, valuable and unique, knowing and trusting, free and alive and whole. We come wired with the expectation that who we are will be seen and reflected back to us. Every child comes ready to receive this simple confirmation of our lovability. It's so basic and fundamental. The other thing I learned is that everyone has childhood trauma. Big ones or little ones. You don't have to have a huge shock to form a personality. But the famous English psychologist, D.W. Winnicott, said, "There are things that happen to us during childhood that should have never happened. And there are things that should have happened that did not." The Enneagram shows us not only what we do with all of this, but fascinatingly, why. We begin to lose the thread to who we once knew ourselves to be. We're so self-forgetting, we start to believe there's either something wrong with us or with everybody else. We become convinced that the world is not actually safe. We're not really in control. We're not even loved, or worse, lovable. The bigger the shock, the bigger the disconnect, the bigger the addiction to our personality. My parenting class taught me that children are not rebelling against their parents. They're rebelling against what's happening inside of them. Kids want what everyone wants, to be respected and connected. In fact, all human behavior is an attempt to get one need met: the need to know that we're loved. When we think we're not, a part of us protests and tries to find our way back home, to remember ourselves. But duality is ego's default. I feel like I have to become something only to find out that I'm avoiding being something else. The Enneagram shows us in 9 different ways how we all use the ingredients of our childhood in order to form an identity. I am good, not bad. I am helpful, not needy. I am valuable, not worthless. I am unique, not ordinary. Knowing, not ignorant. Loyal, not dependent. Happy, not hurting. Strong, not weak. Peaceful, not disruptive. We're so patterned, we're predictable. But this petulant habit of seeking after the thing that I already am is crazy making. It can go on for years or lifetimes. But actually, a part of us does remember. We can recall our true self just enough to mimic it, even though we know it's not the same. The imitation is called ego. Ego is useful. It buffers us from the world. It seems to keep us from our original wound, but eventually, we can hardly tell the difference between the egoic masks we wear and who we really are. And this is the human condition. It's not permanent. It is really painful. I identify with Enneagram Type 1, the idealist. The young one gets the idea that anger is not okay. Anger is not actually a problem, it's intelligent, but my distortion of it had become a big one. Inside, I was raging against my unfair childhood and then scolding myself for not getting over it. I was in a prison of personality, trying so hard. To get on the right side of things that I couldn't remember that I always had been. And so I distracted myself from myself, and I became a certified Enneagram teacher. I know. And one of my first clients was a prison. The idealist in me saw the real application of using the Enneagram to help people to understand how we get in so much trouble with our personality. It was so ironic because I was in so much more trouble with myself than I knew. I saw myself as a human potentialist, but nothing in my world was as I thought it should be. Not my partner, my kids, my parents, my past, and certainly not me. People who know the Enneagram, who don't really know themselves, who can't catch their own personality driving them in real time, are dangerous. I know, because I was one. Children who can't hold their temper are a handful. Adults, even worse. Without the words to name their pain, hurting kids hurt people. They act it out by becoming bullies or class clowns, victims. We tell them, grow up, and then we send them to school, hoping they're going to figure it out. When they can't, the teacher sends them to the principal. The school sends them to the system. The courts send them to juvie. And eventually, we send them to the Department of Corrections, which doesn't correct a thing. I cut my teeth learning how to teach the Enneagram in prison. Among my first incarcerated students was a serial bank robber, a man on the FBI's most dangerous list, a PhD student with a 16-year crystal meth addiction, a former gang leader of the Norteños, and a 65-year-old grandma who was in for embezzlement. Many of whom are sitting among you. The people I met in prison were my perfect mirror. They told me about the prisons made for them during childhood, and then they showed me the one of my own. Together, we retraced our steps to our own goodness, and we saw where we gave our power away and why. We charted the course of our own healing, and along the way, we changed our minds about who we took ourselves to be. And we remembered that actually love belongs to all of us. And it's everybody's birthright to be who we really are. The people that I met on the inside inspired me to found a nonprofit I call Enneagram Prison Project. Today, EPP is on a mission to help people to understand why we do what we do, using the Enneagram to inspire transformation on both sides of the bars through self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-compassion. After over a decade of witnessing people wake up to who they really are, I founded a benefit corporation called the Human Potentialists. We use the curriculum EPP taught us to teach the Enneagram in places like Google and Apple and Blue Bottle and high schools and the California Board of Parole, because we know that we're all in a prison of our own making in the way that we suffer our personalities, and we are all about democratizing the Enneagram, because truly the Enneagram has always been meant for everyone, but not everybody has had access to it. Not everybody has access to themselves. Among the most inspiring people I have ever met are the EPP ambassadors, people who learned the Enneagram while they were incarcerated and found freedom before they were even released. I want to share a very special ambassador with you now. But before I do, would you please join me in taking another breath? And if you're willing, for 30 seconds, please just close your eyes. I'd like to invite you to remember the worst thing you think you've ever done. As you take another breath, just allow the memory to form and notice what thoughts you have. Notice what feelings are arising. Keep breathing. Notice what's happening inside your body. Invite you to bring in some self-compassion for where you were at the time of your life for this memory. Take another breath. Invite you to let that memory go. To feel your feet on the ground. Notice your body in the chair. And very gently invite you to come on back. Thank you. If I were to ask you to turn to the person next to you and share the memory that you just had, which I am not going to do. I'd like you to notice how that makes you feel. The person I am about to share with you has a shit ton of courage to be on this stage right now, having lived an experience of incarceration. He is on the board of directors for Enneagram Prison Project. He is an ambassador for EPP. He is a hell of a grandfather. And he is so many more things. Would you please recognize who you're about to be taught by? This is Alex Senegal. Go get him.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to share with you the worst thing I ever done. The worst thing I ever done in life, I abandoned myself. I became so self-forgetting. I became so self-forgetting in who Alex is that it landed me up in being incarcerated for over 26 years. How does that happen? Not paying attention to this precious child that was born so innocent. How does he get to a point of abandonment? I resonate with Type 9 on the Enneagram, the peacemaker, one who goes at all costs to have harmony and avoids conflict and just goes through life thinking everything should be peaceful. How does a person that identifies with this type of personality end up on the FBI most violent list? How does that happen? What happened to him? I want to share with you. At 5 years old, I was an alcoholic. How does that happen? I was raised in an alcoholic family. My mother was an alcoholic. My mother suffers extensive trauma. And I was given alcohol in my bottle as a child, as a baby. Why does that happen? Because the more that I slept, I didn't have to bother nobody. Nobody had to pay me no attention. So what does that do to a baby? Maybe in my mother's mind, it probably, wasn't going to affect me. But what does that really do when a child so innocent doesn't get the nurturing of the one that brought them into this world? Not realizing the 9 months of incubation that I was being nurtured by her. But then when I came out, life showed up for her. Her alcoholism showed up for her. Her hurt and her pain came out even more. So the more I was out the way, in the cradle where she knew I was at, then she can function. So what ends up happening to a child like that? No connection, no sense of belonging, feelings and thoughts, I must not matter. I must not matter. So when you take me off the bottle, that's fine, but guess what? I still have cravings. I still have the want and the need for alcohol. And because I'm in an alcohol environment and nobody paying me no attention, I go sneak and get alcohol all the time. And I'm an alcoholic. 7 years old, what do you want for your birthday? You have anything you want for your birthday within reason. Bike, skate, some kind of game. I want a fifth of Thunderbird. Okay, that's okay, right? Because this is what I want. The problem is that's what I got. And last time I checked, I was not old enough to go to the store to get it. So I'm involved with this alcoholism. I got this alcoholism. What does it do for me? It helps me escape. It just numbs me. It actually solidifies and confirms that I don't matter. And then I'm not even worth nothing. Who am I? And not to mention the fact that a volatile environment. 5 years old, my sister and I, we go to the store. We get groceries. We're on our way back from the store, my mother's groceries. We get jumped by some kids. They take our groceries. We go home. Mama, they took our groceries. Who took your groceries? Some kid. You got one or two choices. You stay here and you get a beating that you can't win, or you go back out there and fight a fight that you may have a chance to win. What do me and my sister do? Go back and we get those groceries. Constantly violence, constant violence in the neighborhood, in my home. My mother, alcoholism led her into relationships. I have 6 sisters and brothers. 2 of us have the same father. What does that say? My mother doesn't have good relationships. She has destructive relationships. I sleep with a baseball bat at night. Why? Because my mom's drinking. She has company, and I know that there's going to be some violence that's going to happen. Now, regardless to what about my mother, I love my mother. My mother could be wrong as 2 left shoes. I'm not going to let nobody hurt my mother. So I come out with this bat more times than I can remember. And I'm not threatening with the bat. I'm swinging the bat and I'm hitting. And I'm fighting grown men as a child. But what does that do for Alex, who thinks doesn't matter? Well, he gets some kind of sense of value. He gets some kind of sense of purpose. And then, nevertheless, when I hear my mother telling one of her friends what I did, I get some kind of validation that I protected her. So I start to learn that being violent is how I get value. Being aggressive is how I get respect. And I grow up this way, all the way to the point of being a gang member. And I already have this belief system stirring inside of me. The more aggressive, the more violent I am, the more value I have, the more respect I get, the more purpose I have. And all of a sudden, I got connection. Something that I did not have as a child. Something that wasn't in me that was missing, this big old void, this chasm of connection. And the more connection I can get, the more violent I became. And the more violent I became, eventually the more trouble I get into. To the point where I have no respect for authorities. To threaten if I do a crime would send me to prison was not going to deter me from doing that crime. Prison was home. Prison was where I had status. Prison was where I was somebody. So to threaten me with that was not going to deter me from that. So how do you get to a point? How did I get to a point of being so self-forgetting? By taking on a belief system that was totally opposite of who my true essence ever is.
Take a breath, everyone. Take a breath. I love you, Alex.
Yeah, I love you too, sister. Woo.
Well, this is going to be a quick close. We've got 4 minutes. Alex, how in the world did you end up in a place that taught you the Enneagram?
Wow, that's a great question. I came off of a life sentence in 2004. I spent that time from 2004, incarcerated free for 10 years, well, close to 10 years. And during that period of time, I went to school and became, went back to college, became a substance abuse counselor, mental health specialist. I'm a minister of my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I was singing loud in church and everything. And then I ended up Or let me back up 1 second. I never connected as to all these things I were doing that's who I am. That there was no connection there. That's just what I did. The only thing I still had connection with was being the gang member. But I couldn't express that to no one. And I kept it, and then one day it came back, and I went right back to my old behaviors, quick, fast, in a hurry, and ended back up incarcerated. And during that period of time of being incarcerated, I met you.
Take another breath, everyone. Raise your hand if you know the Enneagram. That's so cool. Yeah. That would have been a good question to start with.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
And help us to understand, how did you find freedom inside of yourself through using that tool?
It's funny you call it a tool. Yeah, and some people call it a tool, some people call it a map. But I learned the Enneagram, and learning the Enneagram for me was like learning a different language. Unconscious behaviors, defense mechanisms, and all this stuff. But the fact is, I seen something that was helping me connect back to me. And I often say the Enneagram introduced Alex to Alex.
That's right.
And once I became to the knowledge of who I really am, the Enneagram is not a tool for me. For me, I embodied the Enneagram. Mm-hmm. It's living and it's breathing. It's a living, breathing cell. The EPP may be the organization, but the Enneagram for me is an organ that I lived with and brings life to the point to where I say I am EPP.
He's all that. Alex, what do you want to tell us about freedom?
There's no limit on freedom. Freedom allows me today to be who I am. It allows me to speak my truth. It allows me to say yes when I mean yes, and it allows me to say no when I need to say no. The Enneagram allows me to be loving and kind, compassionate, understanding, and let me tell you, there has to be a special somebody that I don't understand. It allows me to give the love and the nurturing to my children. And it allows me to raise a grandson whose grandmother passed away. And it allows me to help him to reach his goals in life. It's freedom.
I don't ever want to interrupt this man.
Yeah.
We love you.
Enneagram Prison Project and the Human Potentialists, we share a value, a core value called we do the work together. Y'all, I thought I was doing my work. I thought I knew what the Enneagram was. I thought I knew who I was. I thought I understood what consciousness meant. Till I went to prison, I realized I didn't know a thing. Every Wednesday, Alex and I are at San Quentin. He walks in and out of the front gate, and he chuckles every single time. And he is every man's hope in that room, just like he is every person's hope who has ever sat behind bars. My hope today is that his transformation would be your invitation to do more with consciousness in this compassionate community, to bring more compassion to all of the communities and organizations that you touch, so that the Enneagram can do what it wants to do on both sides of the bars. Thank you so much for receiving both of us the way you did today. Thank you.
Thank you.